Don't work in the VFX industry. No, seriously, don't. I've gone to the trouble of researching people's experiences, learning everything that they've gone through, and good God, just don't do it. And now here I am talking about the same thing everyone else is. How much Marvel has ruined the VFX industry. But first, let's talk about what's actually wrong with it. The issue at its core is the bidding process that VFX studios have to go through. Big studios, like Marvel, will hire independent studios to take care of the VFX. You probably already knew that, but did you know that these studios bid against each other, offering cheaper and cheaper rates until eventually it's the cheapest it could possibly be? So imagine this. You're working at a VFX studio. Hell, you own a VFX studio, and you find out there's a new Marvel contract. Sounds amazing. Marvel is huge and it will really establish your studio's name both in the industry and out there. But then you bid, end up massively undercharging and realizing you likely won't be able to make it as good as possible in the time you've agreed to. Not only that, but now your artists are going to have to work 10-hour days every day all the way through production just to make it to this time you've agreed to. Some have described it as being chained to their desks for weeks. It seems like every artist has an example of colleagues passing out from either overwork or just plain illness. It's a nightmare. And it doesn't end there. For one, some countries around the world, including mine, don't have any overtime privileges for any industry. So, UK studios will bid low, knowing that they won't have to pay more for pushing their artists to the brink, and it won't cost a studio a penny to force their artists to work through the crunch. And that's not even including the union problem. Unions exist all over the world, mainly to give workers more power in conversations with their companies. For example, if there's a strike organised, it's much more effective if a large majority of the workers disappear instead of just one or two. You might have seen in the news lately that Starbucks has been fighting against them, because unions historically do work. You would think that in an industry as hellish as the VFX one, unions would be rife and they'd be fighting for better hours and pay, right? Wrong. If a studio is unionised, that means they can't bid as low because they can't push their artists as hard. So most studios crack down on any kind of unionising to make sure they can still bid and win contracts from the big movie studios. Not only that, but the turnover rate is so high that by the time you've gotten the unionisation process going, the people who are working with might be gone. One artist spoke of their colleague who one night at 2 AM during late renders simply said, "Is this really worth it?" and then left that night, and he never came back. So those are the problems. But where did it all start? Luckily, that's the next segment. It's difficult to determine where the slide actually began. Even back as early as 2007, with the third Pirates of the Caribbean, things were getting bad. A lot of artists consider this to be a defining moment in VFX, as apparently Disney began to pile on the pressure, making increasingly huge demands of the studios, but they managed to pull it off. For Disney, this was a success story. They managed to get labour for cheap, but for the industry, it was a clear indicator that they would probably never get more resources or money for projects because everyone would just point at Pirates 3 and say that was finished on time. The standard had been set. And 6 years later, when Life of Pi was released, the VFX studio behind it went bankrupt. They were told partway through production to change the design of the tiger at the behest of the director, Ang Lee. They had to redo most of their work up to that point, and because of the bidding process I mentioned earlier, they were already running on a very low profit margin, which evaporated after the changes were made. They did win the Oscar for Best VFX, but they lost everything in the process. Some say it wasn't the fault of the director, instead citing the mistake the studio made of trying to keep their staff on during the pause that happened in production, when the third act was being reworked. This was to try and avoid issues with staffing up once production started, but it just ended up costing them more. However, this wouldn't have been as big as a problem if the studio didn't have to underbid massively for the project. If they'd had more money, the cost of keeping people on wouldn't have affected the company as much. So if the issues have been around for a while, why are we just hearing about it now? And why is Marvel the only thing we're hearing about? Well, put it simply, it's because Marvel's huge. The amount of projects they pump out every year means they're hiring dozens of studios at a time and pushing them to their absolute breaking point. Just look at Phase 4. Here's a fun graphic I saw, when you can see that this phase has over double the total hours of the entire Infinity Saga. The amount of MCU content these past years has been, quite frankly, grotesque in size, and the VFX artists are feeling it. Not to mention now that the audience is starting to notice. There's a reason there's been a slew of articles popping up talking about how the MCU has ruined VFX. I don't think that's true. It was already ruined, but Marvel is breaking it further. They're pushing artists to the breaking point, many of them taking to Twitter and Reddit to voice their displeasure. Working on #Marvel shows is what pushed me to leave the VFX industry. They're a horrible client, and I've seen way too many colleagues break down and being overworked, while Marvel tightens the purse strings. Just because a lot of folks have mentioned it, this has been the case since the earliest days of the MCU. It didn't start recently, and it's not because of Chapek. The issue is, Marvel is too big and can demand whatever they want. It's a toxic relationship. I am on my 3rd Marvel project in a row, and I literally just woke up at 5:30 AM on a Saturday with stress going, I don't want to do this anymore. All you get from Marvel movies is stress and nothing else. It's 6 AM on a Saturday now, and I am making a reel to apply someplace that has projects other than Marvel because I can't do this anymore. And, as I said, audiences have noticed. The MCU CGI has been lacking, most notably in She-Hulk, with the main character seemingly made in a rush, especially when compared to the other 2 CGI characters in the same show, Hulk and Abomination. I know they were made for movies, and therefore had more time and resources devoted to them, but the difference is laughable. The interesting thing is, Marvel has so many production teams running projects that studios can have wildly different stories of what it's like to work for them. Sometimes they'll have a good relationship, other times it can be awful, and we hear more about the awful ones than not. And it's not a recent problem either. I don't know if you remember, but back in 2019 when Endgame was on its way, Marvel announced that they'd release it a month early. Fans were ecstatic, understandably. But the VFX teams had no idea. They ended up finding out through the press release about it, with Marvel later saying that they forgot to alert the team, and now they had one less month to complete their work. It seems like Marvel doesn't really care about their artists, a point exaggerated by Taika Waititi. I love the man in his work, don't get me wrong, but in the press tour for Thor 4, he spent a lot of time mocking the visual effects. I mean, look at this clip.
Okay. Does that look real?
In that particular shot, no, actually. It doesn't really, right? When you look close.
You need to be more blue.
Well,
you know,
no.
but does he look real?
No, none of
Does
us.
she look like...
Something looks very off about this.
He's mocking his own artists, and the fact that no one really called him out highlights how little VFX artists are respected. It's downright ridiculous. It's all pretty depressing, right? And you think this is the part where I'm going to tell you how we fix this, or what we can do to make this all better for everyone involved. We're going to end this on a happy note, right? Well, sadly, that's wrong. Realistically, the only way to improve the situation for the VFX industry is for studios to ask for more money. And if they do, they probably won't get hired by clients like Marvel, because they can just find someone to do it cheaper. As I said, VFX studios can't unionize, ensuring that the clients always have the upper hand in negotiations. What needs to happen is one of 2 things. Either clients start paying more for the artist's work, or governments start to get involved and ensure that VFX artists and studios have more power in negotiations. And it needs to happen fast, because the burnout and turnover rate of the VFX industry is insane. So, to conclude, is Marvel ruining the VFX industry? Well, yes, but it was already pretty bad to begin with. If I can get poetic for a second, this is the straw on the camel's back, breaking the beast and showing how much of a load they've been carrying for so long. Just pay artists a fair wage and give them the respect they deserve, especially the VFX artists. The amount of work they're doing, it's insane. Anyway, thanks for watching.